The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom not winning the Game of the Year title at the Game Awards 2023 was a huge surprise to Zelda fans, including myself.
Baldur's Gate 3.
No! Yeah, I really expected for it to win because it seemed unrivaled, but Baldur's Gate 3 took the victory, and I'm starting to play through that game to understand why. So if you are curious about what my first reaction is to that game, you can check it out on the channel. But outside the debate of whether Baldur's Gate 3 or Tears of the Kingdom is better, I think there are other reasons in why Tears of the Kingdom lost. As regardless of how ambitious that game was, I mean, ambitious is an understatement, Nintendo went above and beyond to expand on this game compared to Breath of the Wild. But the thing is, it just expands on Breath of the Wild, nothing more. The whole joke of this game being DLC to Breath of the Wild sorta came true, as the game really does feel like a huge expansion to Breath of the Wild and nothing more. It doesn't really warrant the name sequel, it's more so just more of what the previous game was. And while some may argue that is what a sequel is meant to be, not really, as usually the sequel has its own identity. But Tears of the Kingdom is literally just a bigger, better Breath of the Wild, and that's even subjective, as some people still prefer Breath of the Wild over Tears of the Kingdom. But what Tears of the Kingdom does do right is just add more to Breath of the Wild, both above and below, and just generally giving us more to do of what we already did in Breath of the Wild. From having more shrines, which is the main objective once again, at this time instead of blue Sheikah shrines, they are green Zonai shrines, to completing the same sort of dungeons, which they are optional and they can be done very quickly. They're not like the traditional dungeons we know the series for. To even reusing the main concept of Breath of the Wild storytelling, that being through memories as you find them scattered throughout the map, reliving a piece of memory from Hyrule's past, which is something that a lot of fans, including myself, didn't really like in Breath of the Wild. And in Breath of the Wild it made more sense, as Link was suffering from amnesia after the Great Calamity, and he had to recall those memories. But in Tears of the Kingdom, they're just dragon tears, and you're getting memories Link never experienced as you find them throughout the game, once again locking all the main events behind something that happened in the past and not something you can actually discover or be a part of in the game's present. Just overall, from the gameplay to the story, it really is just more Breath of the Wild, and that is the biggest flaw within Tears of the Kingdom. It doesn't have its own identity, and because of that, a lot of fans, again including myself, kinda got tired of this game very, very quickly, which compared to Breath of the Wild, which took me years to stop playing, I've already stopped playing Tears of the Kingdom, and it's only been half a year since it came out. Because it doesn't matter how much content the game has to provide. If the game is just more of the same, it's gonna eventually get repetitive, and that's exactly what happens with Tears of the Kingdom. So it honestly pains me to say it, but yeah, Tears of the Kingdom probably didn't deserve Game of the Year, as all it was more Breath of the Wild, and having to wait 6 years for just more of the same game isn't anything special or Game of the Year worthy. Again, don't get me wrong, the game is so ambitious. It is insane how massive this game is. It is probably the biggest single player game of all time, and it is insane that it all runs on the Nintendo Switch. So again, the game deserves respect in its own right. But you know the saying less is more? Well, that is something that can truly apply to Tears of the Kingdom, as well Nintendo did go out of their way to make a game that is unrealistically huge, 3 times the size of Breath of the Wild with the depths and the sky added to Hyrule's main surface. It becomes lacking in a sense, because both the sky and depths get boring and monotonous really, really quickly after you figure out the main gist of what to do and what to explore throughout it. You eventually realize you're just doing everything again and again in a loop. From the depths' main objective of exploration being finding the light routes throughout it, which at the end don't really give the player anything significant, to the sky mainly having archipelagos that are copy and pasted throughout the entire map, all holding shrines that are very reminiscent of one another. The only unique thing the sky offers is the Great Sky Island, which is the tutorial section of the game. So after you complete that, you don't need to ever return to it, and all the other Sky Islands are nothing in comparison to how much the Great Sky Island offered. So those two major additions to Hyrule didn't really add much in terms of content. And what it did add was sort of shallow and repetitive in gameplay. Because throughout these major additions to Hyrule, all you did was the same thing repeatedly, whether it's in the sky and discovering the many archipelagos that hold a shrine, or you're in the depths and constantly looking for the next light route. And it really didn't help that the game didn't have anything special to reward the player after their efforts in exploring everything they can find within the sky and the depths. As again, Nintendo had doubled down on having the reward not be as significant or worth your while. Which again, some people may argue it's because it's not about the destination, it's about the journey itself. But what if the journey is tedious as all hell? It really just seemed that Nintendo took a few styles of gameplay and constantly copy and pasted them throughout the game to give you that feel of so much to do, but it all was just a giant loop of repeating the same thing again and again. And even if this gameplay loop is similar to what we got in Breath of the Wild, which was enjoyable at that time, having it for a second time isn't anything new or special, and will get really old, especially when having played Breath of the Wild 6 years prior, and then having to do the same thing again in Tears of the Kingdom. It's honestly sort of baffling how Nintendo thought they could get away with just giving us more Breath of the Wild and not doing anything else significantly different within Tears of the Kingdom. They made the main objective once again being shrines that you find throughout the map, with Korok seeds as a way to expand your inventory, and also having the temples not really be the dungeons the series is known for, but just small little areas that you can pretty much avoid throughout the game, and they don't hold much significance in terms of puzzle solving or just fun to be had, as they are really small and they feel like just a longer shrine that doesn't really take much time. And then on top of it, as mentioned before, the story seems sort of lackluster, as you don't actually have to follow in a particular order, and because of that, it ends up repeating the same thing again and again, as with each temple you complete, you hear the exact same story of the imprisoning war, this time just from a different ancient sage. So even then, the story seemed more repetitive than it was in Breath of the Wild, as at least in Breath of the Wild we got to see memories of Link interact with each and every champion with their distinct personalities. But in Tears of the Kingdom, all we get are these faceless, nameless ancient sages that literally repeat one another, saying the exact same story of how the imprisoning war happened. Like, the word repetitive really describes this game, as every aspect of the game is repetitive. Now let me be a bit repetitive as well to help describe this picture for you. The game at its core is just Breath of the Wild, which is something we already played over half a decade ago. You solve shrines as your main objective, just like you did in Breath of the Wild. You collect Korok seeds to expand your inventory, just like you did in Breath of the Wild. The game's main dungeons are optional, and because of that they're very insignificant and don't offer much in terms of gameplay, just like they were in Breath of the Wild. The game's story is also optional, and because of that it's lackluster and not nearly as fleshed out as a Zelda story should be, just like it was in Breath of the Wild. And the main draw to the game is exploring the land of Hyrule, the same land from Breath of the Wild with some alterations, and while they add the sky and the depths, they aren't nearly as fleshed out as the game's surface, so it really takes away from it being anything new. Again, you're exploring Hyrule just like you did in Breath of the Wild. So for the millions of fans who have waited for this game after having played Breath of the Wild, they ended up just getting more Breath of the Wild and nothing new or substantially different. The game piggybacks way too much on its original game, and because of that it has no identity of its own. And before you say, well, that's what a sequel's supposed to be, not really, as there has been other Zelda games that had direct sequels that were far different from one another. A great example is Majora's Mask to Ocarina of Time. As well, Majora's Mask also reused assets from Ocarina of Time. It was completely different. First, it had you explore a completely different world than Hyrule, that being Termina. And while the gameplay was somewhat similar to Ocarina of Time, it had introduced a new way of gameplay with the masks, as you found transformation masks that literally changed up your gameplay entirely. It made the game feel so much different from Ocarina of Time and gave it its own identity. Majora's Mask feels nothing like Ocarina of Time, in its pacing and its overall gameplay, and just generally the vibe it gives. But Tears of the Kingdom to Breath of the Wild is just more of the same. Everything about it is similar to one another. The only major difference is you go from blue Sheikah shrines to green Zonai shrines. It's really just a color difference. And if you want another example, we can say Phantom Hourglass to Spirit Tracks, as well the games were for the most part the same, being a top-down Zelda game that you control with your stylus on the Nintendo DS. In Phantom Hourglass, you explored its world on a boat as you explored its Great Sea. And in Spirit Tracks, you explored New Hyrule on land as you explored via a train on train tracks. The difference between the two games once again gave these games its own identity compared to one another. So in reality, yeah, I guess Tears of the Kingdom really just feels like DLC to Breath of the Wild. Like, imagine if Nintendo released Tears of the Kingdom as DLC called Breath of the Wild: The Upheaval, and it had you explore the depths in the sky as DLC content. I honestly feel like it would have been received much better, as it was originally conceived as DLC before it became a game of its own. And I think because of that, Nintendo focused too hard on just adding more to Breath of the Wild and not really making it a game of its own. Yeah, they had so much content they wanted to add to make it an entirely new game, but at its core, it was originally DLC for an already existing game, and because of that, the end product felt kinda like that. And it's a shame because all of that time they spent developing the game was for features no one really cares about. As the biggest feature Tears of the Kingdom has to offer compared to Breath of the Wild is the building mechanic with the Zonai devices. And let's be real, 90% of players don't utilize that whatsoever. So having Nintendo spend so much development time on a mechanic that most players won't even utilize really did hold the game back. The game was delayed way more than it needed to be because of that, and most players don't even care for it. The only people that will appreciate the Zonai building in Tears of the Kingdom is a small select few who no matter what would have been playing the game because of its silly physics, and are the same players who overplayed Breath of the Wild, messing around with every little thing it had to offer. But let's be real, the casual player and the hardcore fan probably don't want to mess around with stuff like that. So it's weird how Nintendo put so much effort and development time for what is probably a small niche of their player base. So I think Tears of the Kingdom not winning Game of the Year like Breath of the Wild did back in 2017 is a good thing at the end of the day. Well, again, I personally did want it to win as I voted for it. I feel like at the end of the day, it will send a message to Nintendo and let them know that they have to do something different and not just give us more of what was already successful in the past. So who knows, maybe Nintendo will learn from this and know that just giving us more of the same isn't enough. If they're gonna go out of their way to make an entirely new sequel, then they gotta give us an entirely new game, not just something that is similar to the previous. It even seemed like they were guaranteed it would win Game of the Year, as they even released new artwork for the game, in anticipation probably for it winning Game of the Year. Instead, they had to reveal this artwork by celebrating that it won Best Action Adventure Game, which, let's be honest, I bet you that artwork was created for it winning Game of the Year. And speaking of artwork, the game has so little official artwork. Compared to even Breath of the Wild, it's like Nintendo barely tried. They again knew it would be successful without really giving us too much new promotional artwork because of how well Breath of the Wild did. And it's weird to me because with how well the game has sold, you'd think Nintendo would want to capitalize on that and make DLC, but they're not even gonna bother with it. I understand if they're just trying to move on and work on the next big best thing when it comes to Zelda, but the game has so many loose ends and could benefit from some DLC. Especially when they had already previously introduced Master Mode and Trial of the Sword in Breath of the Wild, so how can we not get some equivalent to that in Tears of the Kingdom? Like, come on, the game is in desperate need of Master Mode to give us a reason to replay it again. Even if they don't want to do several waves of DLC, at least release one free DLC update that will give us those missing features. Again, it just further adds to that notion of Nintendo not really trying this time because of how well the game did, as they're really just giving us the bare minimum. And again, don't get me wrong, I love Tears of the Kingdom so much. It's one of my favorite games of all time, but it doesn't mean it's not lacking in many, many ways. So yeah, I sort of look at it as a wake-up call for Nintendo for it not winning Game of the Year, as now they know they have to do better. And I think all of us should look at it this way and not be upset, as at least it gave spotlight to a different game that probably deserved it just as much. And now Nintendo knows that it's not a given that they will win, especially when they have 2 games nominated for Game of the Year and not one of them won. And it's interesting, because in 2017, I knew Breath of the Wild was going to win Game of the Year without a doubt, because what it did to the gaming world was revolutionary. But in 2023, I wasn't certain that Tears of the Kingdom had it, because it didn't do anything revolutionary to the gaming world, as again, it was just more of Breath of the Wild. And because of that, not just me, but a ton of Zelda fans weren't expecting for it to win, and some of them even favored Baldur's Gate 3 over it. So I think the general gist is, yeah, Nintendo should have realized that giving us the exact same game 6 years later, just more of it, won't be enough to win Game of the Year again. If Tears of the Kingdom came out maybe 2 years after Breath of the Wild, yeah, it would have been revolutionary. But 6 years? I don't know. Overall, we can't change the past, and we should just look forward for what's to come. And with how Nintendo seems to have closed the book with Tears of the Kingdom, and now is ready to start on something new, I'm expecting big and amazing things with the next Zelda game. I'm sure Nintendo is ready to move on, as they have even said it themselves, and with them not winning Game of the Year, I'm sure they have realized it as well. So overall, I'm really excited for what's to come with the Zelda series, and I hope you guys are as well. In general, I just want to make this rant sort of video to give you my opinions on why I think maybe Tears of the Kingdom didn't deserve Game of the Year this time around. So I do hope you understand my reasoning, and overall you enjoyed this video for what it was. Again, I apologize if I kind of ran in circles. I really want to reiterate my point, and on top of it, it's more so a rant. I didn't really script it or anything, so I was just kind of going off of the top of my head and just saying what I wanted to say. So if you did enjoy this video, please let me know in the comments below, and let me know if you'd like to see me do any other rant videos like this, and please leave a like on the video to show your support. As always though, I've been ZM, and thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.